everyone, welcome to Inspiring and Able. I am Eliza, and I'm very happy today to welcome a very strong disability advocate. He's worked with Disability Without Poverty, has been featured several times on the Canadian broadcasting show Breakaway on the CBC or Breakdown, and I am so happy to have him here. Please help me welcome Mr. Don Slater. Thanks for joining me, Don.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. So what brought you to disability advocacy to start off?
Well, I originally was a climate activist, although I was disabled since 2005.
Right.
I've had lifelong disabilities, but various work incidents caused me to become more disabled to the point where I couldn't work any longer.
Right.
When I was attending the NDP convention in 2018, I was there concerned about climate issues, but I heard people speaking about disability issues, and I was quite alarmed that even the NDP didn't really have a good grasp of what we were going through. At that point, they had brought in indexing, and I thought there was a little bit of pushback on indexing from the NDP. I didn't like that too much. But the NDP eventually did the right thing and established indexing. From that point on, I really realized the need for disability advocates. And being a disabled person myself, I had a little bit of expertise in the area.
Right.
And so since that time, I formed a couple of Facebook pages to help people and have joined Disability Without Poverty to move our issues forward. I am blessed with an ability to speak and write. As you can see, I can talk endlessly. And yeah, that's just basically my rundown. I have invisible disabilities,
Right.
which is both a blessing and a curse. But it's a blessing in that it lets me participate in some events that others are excluded from, unfortunately. But it's a pain in the butt when people say, why aren't you working? There doesn't appear to be anything wrong with you. So we know the double-edged sword of disability. So
Yep.
And that's I'll wrap it up right there.
I can understand that for sure. Being part of two worlds myself, being a quadriplegic and being able to communicate is something that sometimes gets confusing for people. So, because the world was made for paraplegics more than quadriplegics, so that's something I can definitely relate to, is the whole being part of two worlds and people not getting it. So I appreciate your trust in being here today. What do you think is the most important issue facing people with disabilities today?
Well, I think our biggest issue is that we're in poverty. And when you're in poverty, you can't really participate in a community. Money isn't happiness, but it's certainly freedom. And the lack of money can certainly bring misery. And this is something that I want politicians to understand about disability. A disability is a handicap when your disability has obstacles in its path. A flight of stairs for a person in a wheelchair changes disability to a handicap. And
Right.
I'd like politicians to understand that the primary handicap is a lack of affordability, the inability to participate in social circles because you simply just cannot afford to go out with friends or go to events. Never mind the fact of keeping a roof over your head and keeping yourself fed. We're in absolute poverty, and you'll hear Jason Nixon often say that Alberta has the most generous. Well, that's not really true. It's the least cheap. And I really want politicians to understand that if you're not helping a person completely, you're not doing your job. And so the biggest issue we face is a monetary and affordability issue at this time.
Mhm. Would you say, and you're allowed to say no, by the way, would you say that poverty is a poverty in like visibility for people with disabilities, like not being seen in social discourse, adds to the affordability and the monetary problem that you mentioned?
Yeah, I think that's a major problem as well. As you know, there's not any MPs or MLAs. There's one MP with a disability, and it's a fairly minor disability, and there's no MLAs that I know of that are disabled. So I often say
Mhm.
to people that disabled people have a heck of a lot of empathy because empathy is crafted in fire. And as you know, our lives are full of struggle,
Yep.
and we have developed a profound empathy for others by what we've gone through. I
Yep.
think many politicians have a lack of experience, and they relieve themselves of their moral obligations by saying stuff like it's the most generous benefit, or they relieve themselves with the idea that we're just fine, right? Like $200 is lots, so we'll be fine on that, right? So
Yep.
I don't know what really goes through the mind of policymakers. I would like to be a fly on the wall and hear them talking. This is the primary meaning of the word ableism. Like, I call it soft ableism. I don't think that many politicians intend to be cruel by ignoring our needs. I just think they don't understand. And
Yeah.
what they're guilty of, though, is not giving us a forum so that they can understand. And
Mhm.
when given the opportunity to listen to us, they really have to listen.
And how would you say um we would what is the best method in your opinion to get people to us?
Oh, I wish I knew that answer. I've tried every angle to speak to politicians. Um, they seem to isolate themselves from our community. They'll have staff members blocking our path. Like, we'd like to speak. There are certain members of the disabled community that do have their ear, but then they end up resigning when they're disappointed or so completely disappointed. And I do not know why the Liberals produced such a mediocre benefit when they had full support from everyone. They had support from the public, they had support from the opposition parties, and yet they came out with a meager benefit. I would like to say you stand on their foot and you don't let them walk away until you get them to answer you. But I've just found that politicians are just consumed with party politics and doing what they're supposed to do and never straying away from talking points. And that's really a sad thing for all of society because, as you'll often hear me say, if you can't care for the vulnerable, who can you care for? And that's
Mhm.
why its society is judged by how it takes care of its most vulnerable members. If you can't care for the most vulnerable, what the heck are you doing? And I
Indeed.
think our political system really needs a big shakeup.
Do you think that, and I'm just gonna throw something at you, do you think part of the shakeup though is that there was a lack of understanding of what the operational definition was for the benefit? Like, I think people with disabilities had like this impression that it was gonna be like this watershed, while the politicians had this idea of a supplement, which may have caused the different um, amounts that we were all expecting. Do you think that could have been part of the problem?
Well, that's a very big part of the disappointment. When the parliamentary budget officer released three estimates for what the disability
Right.
benefit should be. We were talking about 20 billion a year. And that would have given every disabled person between $1,200 and $1,800 a month. Leaked information from the government seemed to indicate that we were going to get a significant benefit that would remove people from poverty. But the first sign that they weren't going to do that was the very title of the bill when it said an act to reduce poverty. So that was the first sign for me
Yeah.
that they weren't going to end poverty, even though that's their job according to the agreement they signed with the United Nations. I believe it's Article 28. But Canada has an obligation to end disability poverty. And this is why I'm hoping that the Liberals are just spreading out their political capital, announcing a small benefit at first that's perhaps free from clawbacks. And then once provincial agreements are made, the benefit will increase before the election. That's sort of using the disabled community for political gain, but I'd rather be used for political gain and get a good benefit than not be used
Yeah.
and get a poor benefit. But again, I say soft ableism. They don't seem to really understand, or they don't really value us. I don't want to think that they don't care, because that's a very dismal position to put myself in, thinking that politicians just don't care about us.
Right.
I think they just don't think about us.
I agree with you too. I think, and I also think that we have to consider that disability is still in the social awareness stage. Like, we need to bring it out to more awareness, because why I wanted to talk to you too, because I've heard you a man of many connections, and I'm just like, I'm really grateful for that, because we need to bring it more visible, because you can't ignore somebody you see. You can pretend
Yeah.
to, but if you don't see them, then you can't help them. And so I think, for me at least, that's where I'm coming from. It's like, yes, at least they saw us. It's a starting point. But a lot of people, like you said, are very disappointed, because there was big promises made. And how do you think the disability community and government could mend this disappointment and work together, do you think?
Well, I've often thought, why isn't the disabled community united? And I think the answer to that is every advocate works for a particular disability, and disability does not just mean one disability. There's my disability, there's your disabilities, and there's other people's disabilities. And the advocates get so busy representing a particular person or a particular group that
Mm-hmm.
they don't really have a lot of time to associate with other disability advocates. And this is a real shame, because we do need a cohesive unit, like Inclusion Alberta, for example, needs to bring all the disabled groups or disability groups together. You'd like to have a list of all the disability groups. We've recently seen Enough is Enough is bringing Albertans together to protest at the legislature. And I think we need something like that for the disabled community. I do believe that the average person, unless they're exposed to people with disabilities, has a tendency to look away. Um, it's
Mm-hmm.
sort of a there for a grace of God go I reaction that people have. They don't want to look upon the less fortunate, because there's an internal fear of themselves. So
Mm-hmm.
exposure to people with disabilities is very, very important, that they get to see our humanity, our empathy, our intelligence, and everything that we have to offer. We have been subjugated by soft ableism. And the reason I use the term soft ableism is I don't think it's in people's hearts to be cruel. Like, ableism
Yeah.
is cruel, right? And I
Yeah.
don't think it's in their hearts to be purposefully that way. I do think that they have to be aware of it, and being aware of it is the first thing that they can do to bring a positive change to our community.
Mm-hmm.
I think what you're doing is wonderful because this is where it begins. This is how we get disabled people to get together. We have conversations with each other. My disability is far different than your disability, for example, but here we are having a conversation.
Right, and I've often heard that people are like, "Oh, he's speaking for," or they're speaking for different disabilities that he doesn't know about. And I'm just sitting there going, "Well, he knows how to be human," or
Yeah,
like just for me, that's where I come from, which is why I'm very grateful when you speak for people that don't necessarily have your disabilities, is because, yeah, could you make a mistake? Definitely, but mistakes can be fixed. Like, you just
yeah.
need to communicate with one another. And there's so much division. And how do you think the best way to heal this division would be? Like,
I think just doing what you're doing is the best thing that can be done. Reach out. Even though you have a disability that makes it very difficult for you to participate in web events and podcasts, you're brave enough to do it. And I think that this has to be what every disabled person does, is not to feel limited by their disability, but empowered by it, and realize that they're a human being that has a life worth living, and really get themselves out there. And I think we're seeing a more positive statements from the disabled community, perhaps because they've had enough of this BS of being pushed down. Um, we want our disability benefits to be a platform that we can take off from. We don't want them to be a ceiling. And like I said, when people say ASHA is the most generous, when it's a poverty level benefit, that really
down for
keeps us,
everyone.
yeah, it keeps us all down. And so I think when disabled people use their voices, as you're doing, as I try to do constantly, it brings our community together. We can really use social media for that benefit as well. And one of the biggest things that disabled people have to watch out for is that they don't get caught up in the limelight. Once the spotlight is on people and politicians are finally paying attention to us, we have to remember that we're not doing it for ourselves and that we're doing it for the whole community.
Yep.
Some people, because we're ignored so often, once we get a little bit of attention, we say, oh, wow, we're getting a little bit of attention. And some people get carried away and forget what their purpose is. So I think every disabled person who advocates for the community has to remember that their primary function is to support each other.
Yes, agreed.
A little
And
bit of a speech there, sorry.
no, you're preaching to choir, but they're probably, because that's the whole point of this channel, is basically like, stop arguing, let's
Yeah,
just get on.
yeah.
But what's your purpose then, if I may? And you can't answer me. I'm just, what do you think your purpose is then?
Well, my purpose is to remind government of its primary function, and that's to defend the public and care for the public. I
Mm-hmm.
think Albertans are inherently good people that really care about each other. But I think that politicians say things that make the public feel that we're undeserving, which is the worst thing that can
Mm-hmm.
happen. I just wanted to address the bad things that happen so we can get them out of the way. When you hear people like Matt Wolf say the S in ASH is for severely, inferring that what he sees is a bunch of people that aren't severely enough handicapped for him
Yeah.
to deserve support.
Mm-hmm.
But we remember what Humphrey says, that a good society is judged by how it takes care of their most vulnerable members, the children that are in the dawn of life, the seniors that are in the twilight, and the people that have suffered the the cruel hand of fate, that are struggling to get by even though they have a disability or infirmity of some sort. So Society, if you ask people in society, if you don't know who you're going to be tomorrow, if you don't know if you're going to be a millionaire or if you're going to be disabled, you'll find that people are very generous to the disabled community because they don't know if they're going to be the disabled person. So it's really about putting our plight into the minds of the everyday person. I don't know if that came across well. It's called the veil of ignorance, and
And
it asks people to assess their lives based on who they might become and how they would treat themselves. And when
yeah,
they consider themselves, they consider others.
hmm definitely agree. So, what, um, what would you think would help bring this society of the vulnerable together? Like, what's an action step? Like, let's say that my listeners could take to support us, because I'm a big believer in action steps.
Mhm. Well, participate and participate and participate. Don't give up. If you get angry at government, use that anger and generate it into a positive energy. Um, Create podcasts. Go to anything that you can go to. I'm not asking people to do something that's beyond their ability to do, but participate as best you can. Um, Always knock on the politician's door, whether that's through email or phone calls. Just be the squeaky wheel.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean being a nasty wheel, but it means being, raise your voices up. Again, what you're doing is wonderful. Creating a podcast is wonderful, and this is how we start. We start with podcasts like yours, and we keep moving forward. And there's definitely been more action in the disabled community to create a cohesive force. So I think we're in the beginning stages of really turning into something that's more powerful
Mm-hmm.
because we are unified.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree. And one question, because we're in the final 10 minutes here. It's been a great discussion, but
Okay.
what inspires you to continue forward? And this is something I ask everybody.
Yeah. Well, it's my humanity that pushes me forward. We certainly run into a lot of obstacles. I mean, the disabled community can be fairly cruel to itself. Like we have people that are trying to shut us down all the time. So we have to remember what our purpose is as human beings. Of course, my empathy has been crafted through my suffering. Like I've lived a life with neuropathic pain disorder. And so every day of my life, since the time I was 16 years old, I've suffered through everything I've done. And perhaps that crafted more empathy in me than it has for your average person. It's suffering is good for the soul. It's not particularly